This is my first time presenting on Hangouts, so I'm just trying out everything. And let me know if something is not clear. Okay. So I think we'll start. Please, like everyone, mute your.
Suribhai, your presentation can't see. I think you'll have to
Yeah.
start it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can see now.
So this is rather like a conversation, not a formal meeting or something. So feel free to stop me anytime you want during the conversation, and you can ask me any questions that you may have. And mostly, let's try to keep all the questions towards the end. Like I'll try to present it. I think it may just take some 50 minutes maybe, and we'll keep some 20, 25 minutes for the questions. So, I mean, if there are some topics that I have not discussed during these and you have some questions which are outside these slides, even those questions you can ask. I mean, it's not that you have to ask questions only related to the slides. So at first I was actually thinking on coming to BITS and giving a proper talk person to person, but I even booked my flight tickets and everything, but due to this COVID again, I have to cancel everything. So I was talking to Nikhil, and then we were thinking of actually first putting three talks, like one talk on a general topic, wherein I discuss about research and everything, and the other two talks on what research I did during my visits to Penn State and UW Madison. But if you people are interested, maybe we'll do those other two talks, wherein I'll actually talk about my research in detail, trying to explain as much as possible in layman terms. Maybe later, after 2 3 weeks, maybe if you people are still interested. I mean, let's try this out with this talk. So, yeah, I graduated in 2019 with a BE Mechanical Engineering and minor in physics. So after that, during my fourth year, I did my thesis at UW Madison on particle astrophysics under a professor called Francis Haljan. So you people might actually met him because he gave a what you call a talk, an online talk to you all on iStream. And I think you will also met the other person, David Redici, with whom I'm currently working with. So after completing my thesis, undergraduate thesis at UW Madison, I moved to Penn State to start my RA. So due to some visa constraints, I did my RA in US at Penn State only for 7 months. And after that 7 months, recently in February, I had to come back to India. But I think someone has to switch up their mic. Yeah. So in February, I came back to India. Uh, and starting then till now, I've been at home due to COVID, and I'm just continuing the projects that I've started at Penn State. So today, I wanted to talk to you all about. Uh, I mean, so recently, a lot of people have been messaging me asking how should I write an email for an internship, or how should I fill this form, or how should I search for professors, or etc. etc. So I thought instead of like answering each and every one of you all, I thought maybe I'll first give you all a general talk so that you'll get a general concept as to how to approach these different your interests in different fields in physics. And later on, supposing you have some more questions which are not answered by this general talk, you can always message me or any other senior. It's not just me. Like there are a lot of other seniors who have gone to very good places, and you can always talk to them too and ask any specific questions that you have. So I think let's start with it. So the first, I would like to tell you, as I was.
Your voice is not very clear, and there is also some background noise.
Oh, okay, just give me a minute. Okay, how about now?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, yeah, sorry for that. Like maybe because of the fan, I'll talk a bit loud too. Yeah, so as I was saying, like, I mean, there are various fields in physics that you take solid state physics, condensed matter, nuclear astrophysics, like etc. etc. But since I've worked mainly on these two topics, particle astrophysics and gravity, and I've been exposed mainly to two of these fields, that's why I'll kind of focus on these two. But some of the things that I say are applicable to other fields in physics too. So to start off with, you take any field currently in physics. It's mainly divided into this, what you say, if you look at this slide, experimental data analysis, phenomenology, and source modeling, and theory. So if you take any field in physics, it's mainly divided among these, how many are there? Five of these. So experimental, as you know, like if you take a condensed matter, you always conduct some experiments to look for some observations of the system. This experimental can be ranging from some tabletop or a lab experiment to a telescope, which can be like there are different types of telescopes like an interferometer or an optical telescope, X-ray, gamma, etc. So by experimental, I mean everything. And data analysis. Since you're conducting so many experiments and you're getting so much data, you need to retrieve the signal that is hidden in the background noise. So that is one part. And after you retrieve the data from the back of like removing the background noise from the observed data, you need to do something with the data, right? I mean, supposing I recently slightly dealt with data analysis in gravitational waves, wherein you have two black holes inspiring towards each other and merging. So using the data that we get from the LIGO experiment, which observes these binary mergers, neutron stars, black holes, etc., through gravitational waves using a laser interferometer, we what we actually try to do is test general relativity or use general relativity to actually predict the masses and spins of these black holes and neutron stars. So once you get these masses and spins of these different black holes and neutron star systems, you can do more physics with that. So even this part is the statistical part. And the first part, where you have to actually clean the observed data and get the actual data that you need. So the actual signal that you need, that is something different. That is pure data analysis. But the other side I'm talking about is statistical side, wherein you have to estimate what is the confidence interval that you have on a given estimated mass or spin of your system. So that is a statistical way. So majority of the experiments in the world related to physics, you may take a particle detectors like IceCube, Antareas, or a X-ray telescope like Swift, or a gamma ray telescope like Fermi, or Hubble Space Telescope, or recently there has been this talk by an astronomer where he actually uses I forgot, yeah, Keck Observatory, or you take something like gravitational wave, LIGO experiments, everything like collect these huge amounts of data, and they mainly require a lot of people who have some expertise in physics and also a lot of expertise in dealing with these statistics. So don't think that way the statistics is something not important. I mean, nowadays it's becoming more and more important as the inflow of data is increasing. And the next thing is once you have this data, And once you're estimating these different quantities, you would want to know, can you constrain any parameters in your theory or model? So supposing you create a model, right, based on a theory, like you use Einstein theory of relativity, or Maxwell's electromagnetism, or QCD, etc. You use all these theories and you develop models for different systems. The systems can range from simply black holes to neutron stars, etc. And when you devise these models, like invent these models for these different systems, there might be some free parameters in your theory or in the model which you want to constrain to better understand how things are happening. So that comes under phenomenology. So for example, I gave you black holes and neutron stars, but it can be anything. And the next thing is source modeling, wherein you actually are developing the model itself, like from the theory, like how do you develop models for different systems? Uh, and that is one. And the other is theory itself, where theory deals with these fundamental theories like Einstein theory of relativity or the QCD, etc. So you would directly go into theory itself rather than model or something. So there is always an top to down and bottom to up approach, wherein you start from experimental and constraint theories, or you start from theories and you go towards building experiments. So it's either ways. There is always a flow in this way or that. So why I wanted to talk about all this is like mostly people when they do their undergrad studies, they think that theoretical physics is the only way to go about, or I mean it's not. I mean there are a lot of other things to explore. That's what I really wanted to point out. And nowadays, as you all know, doing research in pure theory is really difficult, like both financially and also in terms of the number of opportunities that are presently out there. So you have to like adjust a little bit, or I mean it's not like adjust, I mean you won't be exploring all this during your undergrad. Like during your undergrad projects mainly you'll be learning only theories or few models, but you're never doing any hands-on work. So if you actually are trying to get an internship or thesis or an RA or a PhD, it can be anything. Try to explore as much as possible among these different things, like during your thesis or during your summer projects, etc. Like don't just stick to your pure theory. I mean, once I've explored everything, then if you think that pure theory is the only one that I want to go for, then go for pure theory. No one is stopping you. But do not say it's only pure theory without exploring the rest of it. So that's the one thing that I want to talk about. And next, if we come to particle astrophysics, the currently the main thing, I mean, the main interests in particle astrophysics are these building different experiments or improving on the current existing experiments. Like if you have heard experiments, I was saying the Ice Cube or Swift or Fermi or Andreas, all these are particle detectors. Like it can be a photon detector or it can be some cosmic rays or high energy neutrinos, etc., coming and falling on your detectors and you're detecting these. So you want to build better experiments, or you want to know how do you know that you have detected these, like, or how can you design a detector module which can detect these particles. So that comes in the experimental particle astrophysics. And then comes the data analysis part in particle astrophysics, wherein the first part is again similar. Like there's a lot of background noise. So again, even you people always say there is this background noise in your experiment. So there are different types of background noise when it comes. Like one is noise that's coming from your own experiments. That noise can be different, ranging from different experiment to experiment. So there are a huge number of people in an experiment working particularly modeling this noise. So in LIGO, there are noises because of the movement of the what's a mirror or due to earthquakes, or there are different types of noises. And similarly, in Ice Cube, there are some errors because of the wiring or because of not a clear transparent ice or some soil being present in the ice, etc. So there are all these sorts of noise that you need to model so that you can actually treat them as background. I mean, even if you consider a LIGO and you're looking at gravitational waves, there is always this background noise that is coming from a variety of sources which your experiment cannot detect. Like there are these low mass binary, like low mass objects or there is this something called stochastic background, to which a lot of astrophysical systems contribute to it, and you cannot really distinguish those sources which contribute to this stochastic background. So even they form a background. Or these binary white dwarfs, when they actually merge, these binary white dwarfs also form a background for some other systems. Like binary white dwarfs can form a background for binary neutron stars, because for the binary neutron stars, the gravitational signal that you get, it's way more higher compared to the gravitational signal that you get for the binary white dwarf. And your experiments here on Earth are rather tuned to the binary neutron star systems compared to the binary white dwarfs. And that is why you treat these binary white dwarfs signals as background noise. So you need to model all these different noises. And once you have modeled all these, you will collect all of them and put together and call them background noise. And once you have developed this background noise, I mean, there's a lot of research going on in this too. And once you have developed the background noise, and that is when you look at your data and see if there is some signal which is above your background noise in terms of its amplitude, phases, etc. It can be any parameter. And once it's more than that, and that is when you treat it as a signal and you pick it out. And once you pick it out, then you do a lot of statistical analysis on it, which can be, supposing if you take an ice cube experiment, they want to tell you what is the energy of the high energy neutrino, from what direction will it come, what type of neutrino is it. And after you do that, then you use a model which is based on high energy astrophysics, saying that what could be the possible source of this high energy neutrino. From, since it came from this direction, are there any follow-up observations? Even that is a new research that's coming up. Like supposing, which is called multi-messenger astronomy and astrophysics, wherein you observe a particular source using different messengers. It can be neutrinos, electromagnetic waves, gravitational waves, etc. So you observe all of these waves from a single source simultaneously. So there are problems of localization also. Like supposing if you take gravitational waves, they don't have such a good localization. Like you cannot perfectly say that the gravitational signal has come from this direction. You can only always say it came from this band in the sky. So if you want to localize perfectly as to from which galaxy it came from, then you need to use on some other observations on top of your gravitational wave observations, which are electromagnetic observations. And based on that, you can pinpoint the source and you can study more about astrophysics. So that all comes under your statistics, and yeah, statistics. And after that, once you have estimated the values of the parameters, then you move on to phenomenology. Like you look at different types of systems, like dark matter. Like you say, supposing this is the high energy unit that is being produced. How can this be produced? If it is produced by dark matter, then what should have been the masses of those dark matter particles? So you constrain the masses of these dark matters, because based on the standard model and string theory, etc., there are there is a like an interval of masses which are viable for dark matter. So you want to know among this interval what is the right value for the dark matter. So you try to shrink in this interval so that you at one day in the future, when you have more and more data, so that you can get a perfect value for this mass of dark matter particle and nature of this dark matter particle, because dark matter particles are predicted by different forms of theories and models. So you want to know which model is viable. You can rule out some models, you can rule out some theories. So all of that comes under phenomenology. And the next thing is source modeling. As I was telling, once you know from which type of source it came from, you need to constrain the source. Like supposing in my case, it was a blazar which produces high energy neutrinos. A blazar is like an ASIAN with two jets and the jets pointing towards a direction. So you want to know what is the angle of the jet, what is the strength of the jet, what is the length of the jet, and what are the velocities or Lorentz factors of different particles in this jet, what is the central mass of the central black hole, or how much accretion disk is present around it, how much accretion rate is happening. So you want to constrain all these parameters based on different models. So that is source modeling. And after that is theory, which comes into your standard model. Supposing there are like maybe some free parameters in standard model. which you can fix through experiments. So that is one way. So yeah, and if you come to gravity, as I was telling, there are different areas. So one hot topic currently that exists is gravitational waves. I mean, people are trying to constrain everything, like they're trying to explore every everything in the physics. Like you take nuclear physics, you take particle physics, you take gravity, you take what's it, cosmology, you take astrophysics. They're considering each and everything just using gravitational waves, like they're studying everything. It's a very hot topic. So if you're interested in gravitational waves, you, as you know, LIGO India is coming up, so they need a lot more students. So that is one very good project to look at currently. So don't forget about that. And next thing is mathematical relativity, wherein comes in the Einstein's general theory of relativity. As you know, there are a lot of problems inside Einstein's theory of general relativity itself. Like supposing they predict singularities, and singularity should not exist in reality. So something needs to be done with the mathematical relativity or general theory of relativity so that the singularities are removed from your Einstein's equation, which can be a quantum gravity theory or something. Or there are like say when I say gravitational waves, so even in gravitational waves everything is not understood mathematically. Even there's a lot of work needs to be done. And as you know, all these like all these, as you know, Einstein field equations are not linear. Like they're partial differential equation and they're non-linear in nature. So it's very hard to solve them analytically. And that is when you have to use some numerical methods to actually solve these equations so that you can get some approximate solutions which converge by increasing your resolution of your numerical scheme. So that is one thing. I mean, using numerical relativity. So when you actually take a gravitational wave or a merging system, a merging black hole, you have three different phases: an in-spiral, merger, and a ring down. During an in-spiral, you can always treat these two black holes far away, and we can use some perturbation theory of Newtonian mechanics called post-Newton approximation to actually deal with this system. And once it comes into the ring down phase, even there the strong non-linearities don't come into picture. Even there you can use some perturbation of general theory of relativity to actually deal with the ringing down system of the remnant object that formed from merging of these two black holes. But during the merger, the nonlinearities become so significant that you cannot ignore them and you cannot use a perturbation technique, either perturbation of a Newtonian or perturbation of general theory of relativity. You cannot use either. And that is when numerical relativity mainly shines, where you have to deal with highly nonlinear and significant, like you have to treat them, you cannot ignore the nonlinearities. That's when numerical relativity comes into pictures. And in numerical relativity, you can always deal with systems like black holes, supernovae, or what's a binary neutron stars, binary white dwarfs, a neutron star black hole, a neutron star white dwarfs. So there are different systems which can be dealt in numerical relativity. And after that, I think I already spoke about data analysis. And coming to phenomenology, you can always use phenomenology to constrain uh, neutron stars. Like you don't really know what is the inner structure of a neutron star. Like how does the mass vary with respect to radius, or how does the temperature vary, how does the pressure vary with radius, or with time during the evolution. You don't know any of this and you need to constrain them. And the other is population studies. Like recently, you have been told about this in the during the Keck Observatory talk, right? Like you have this first generation, second generation, and third generation stars, and these stars are actually distributed among a galaxy, and these stars occasionally form binaries too. So you want to know how many binaries are out there in the universe, in the observable universe, and how are they distributed, how are they evolving with respect to time. So that all comes under population study. You can always consider all that. And the next thing is early universe. This is not a really, I mean, it's very hard to say anything about early universe because people are still working on it. But the essential idea is that As you know, before CMBR, the universe was actually opaque. And the only way to explore that opaque universe is currently only using elements, the abundance of different elements that are present in the universe, like lithium, beryllium, etc., and their different distributions and abundances. Based on that, you can actually constrain what's happening in the early universe. So apart from this approach, current existing approach, they also hope that maybe there are some primordial gravitation, primordial black holes, or these small perturbations that when coalesce, they might produce some gravitational waves, which can affect the structure of the CMBR that we see, through which we can actually understand how the gravitational waves are propagated through the early universe and how they have been modified or how they have been produced. So we can constrain all this based on their effect on the CMBR. So that is one thing that's being taken up. And the other thing is elements. Like you say, there are these different, as you know, in a supernova or in a regular star, the heaviest element that can be formed is an iron. But when you take a supernova, you can form heavier elements like lanthanide series, some other heavy elements. But it turns out that even those astrophysical sites for the production of these elements cannot explain the formation and abundance of all the elements that currently exist in the universe. So there needs to be some other highly energetic astrophysical site which can produce more heavier elements. And that is where your neutron star merge is coming, wherein people believe that there is a process called R process, which is called rapid neutrino capture process, which can explain how these different elements form in the universe. And from population studies, you can know how these neutron star mergers are distributed in the universe. And if you can actually say that from these neutron star systems, I get this number of elements and in these abundances. So if you combine both of these ideas, like wherein from each neutron star you get so many elements and with so many abundances, and with the population distribution of the neutron stars, you can get the explanation for the distribution of the elements in the universe. And this is a new field that's emerging, and it's called galactic chemical evolution. So that's a very interesting topic too. And apart from this, there are theories which are beyond general relativity, which also try to say that general relativity is not complete. You need to include a few more things into your action, Einstein-Hilbert action, which is the fundamental thing for a general theory of relativity. So that when you add more terms to this Einstein-Hilbert action, you can get modified theories of gravity, which can explain different phenomena that are not being able to explain by general theory of relativity better with this theory. So that is one thing which you can constrain based on gravitational waves. Like supposing you can say, if I take a black hole in a theory which is not a general theory of relativity of Einstein, but some other theory of gravity, what are the form for the gravitational waves that are being produced in that beyond general relativity theory? So that gravitational wave signal might be different from your usual gravitational signal that you get, assuming that Einstein's theory of general relativity is true. So if you actually observe this difference in the observational data, then it means that Einstein's theory is not true, but rather the other theory is true. So that is being done currently in beyond general relativity. And after comes your planetary science, like how do planets form, or how do planets migrate in a solar system once they form, or there is embodying cosmology, wherein they look at what is the star formation rate. Like they take a molecular gas cloud and they put in some shock waves inside this gas cloud and see how high density regions of these molecular clouds form. And from this can we understand the distribution of the different star formation, distribution of the stars and their formation rates in galaxies and outside the galaxy. And the next thing is, as I was telling, you can do all these numerical things, not just by treating like there is this approach, right? Wherein you can treat all your physical quantities in terms of fields. But there is this smooth particle hydrodynamics, wherein they actually, instead of treating everything as fields, they treat them as particles. So the particles actually move about there. Like you try to control the particles, like you write some equations for the dynamics of the particles rather than dynamics of the fields. It's pH. So that's just a different approach, which is actually gaining more and more prominence in certain physical situations. And the next thing is different forms of cosmology. Like, as you know, the current leading theory of cosmology is Big Bang theory. But as you know, Big Bang theory has this singularity at the start of Big Bang. I mean, yeah. But this is not true. You cannot have a singularity. It should be something else. So people say that it can be either be resolved using quantum gravity, or there is this new idea called bouncing cosmology. I think the spelling is wrong, sorry. But yeah, I think you should definitely look at this. It's a new upcoming idea which will replace the current existing Big Bang paradigm with this bouncing cosmology. And this bouncing cosmology does not require any inflation, or I think it doesn't even need dark energy to actually explain the expansion of the universe, or why did the universe expanded so fastly during the first few minutes. Or yeah, I mean, many caveats in Big Bang theory which are needed to explain by adding different things. You need not do any such artificial things in bouncing cosmology. Everything comes out generally. So that is a very interesting idea. And apparently even that theory involves some non-linear partial differential equation, which needs to be solved using numerical utility. So even bouncing cosmology is coming into hype. So that is one thing. And if you come to computational astrophysics, so as you know, nobody exactly knows how these astrophysical jets, which span some light years, how do they form? Nobody knows. That's the truth. If you can do your PhD and explain how this forms, you're going to get the next Nobel Prize. So remember that. And the next thing is supernovae. So how does the supernova happen? Even that is not understood well. Even there are a lot of problems in that. And star formation I've spoken about, binding mergers I've spoken about. And next thing is effects of turbulence. Like supposing you take some turbulent effects into your system, how do they affect your different observables of your system? Like can turbulence affect how the jet forms, or the angle of the jet, or the strength of the jet? Can it affect that? Something like that. So I think I'll stop a little bit now, and I can take some questions if you allow. Yeah. Any questions? Hello. I mean, you may ask me any question or no. Can you all hear me? It just said that.
Yes, yes, yes.
So no questions? Or hello, or was it too technical? Okay, I see a lot of messages. Okay, coming to this, you people can still hear me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, while doing data analysis, you do actually get probabilities, and that is why I was mentioning some confidence intervals. So since there will be some errors in your experiments, which are uh, measurement errors because of your noise in the experiments, or due to modeling errors, since you use some computational methods to actually solve these partial differential equations that are arising in your model, you always get an approximate solution. You can never get an exact analytical solution. So there will be some errors even from your modeling, which are called modeling errors. So when you combine both these modeling errors and measurement errors, you do get some probabilities. Like you can only say that the value is like, supposing you take black hole mass, that the mass of the black hole can be present in this confidence interval. So you can only always get confidence intervals in the probabilities, never a certain answer. So yeah. Any other question? No, we cannot arrive at an accurate solution because even though our approximate solutions converge, when you increase the resolution of your numerical scale, still it needs to be infinite to actually get an exact solution. So you can never hope to get an exact solution where there are some non-linear partial differential equation. So currently we're stuck with it. So if you can come up with a mathematical theory which can handle analytical solution for nonlinear partial differential equation, then yeah. So any other questions? I mean, it can be related to anything. I think I'll show the slides maybe. Um,
Suri Bhaiya,
yeah,
you talked about the modified theories of gravity.
yeah,
Yeah, so it was about like introducing some additional terms to Einstein-Hilbert action.
yeah.
So what are we basically trying to get rid of? Like, is it just singularity, or is there any other issue with the current general theory of relativity? Or is it just singularity, or is there something else that we are trying to get rid of?
So yeah, so basically what I'm trying to say is that using current Einstein's general theory of relativity, what you do, basically you have an Einstein-Hilbert action. Then what you do, you write some geodesic equation which explains the paths that the test particles follow, or how do you get this geodesic equation? You need something called a Christoffel connection inside these geodesic equations. And how do you get these Christoffel connections? Only by solving, only by knowing what is the metric, because a Christoffel connection is nothing but some different combination of derivatives of these metrics. And how do you get this metric? You get this metric by solving your Einstein field equations. So the end product of Einstein field equations in this situation, if you look at the geodesic equation, it depends on the metric that you get out of the Einstein field equation. So if you try to modify the Einstein field equation itself or the geodesic equation itself, then you will get some different results because you'll get some different metric, or you'll get a different geodesic equation for a given metric. So it can be either that. So once you have these modified geodesic equations, you can see uh, like what's a, it may not I mean, I didn't do a lot of research in beyond general relativity, so I'm only able to give you a general overview. So it might be just be that in the new general theory of in the new form theory of gravity, we may not require dark energy, we may not require dark matter. So that's the thing. Like it can be a modified theory which can explain your galaxy rotation curve without invoking any dark energy, dark matter. Or it might be a new theory of gravity which can explain your expansion of the universe without invoking dark energy. So that is where this all beyond general relativity comes in, not just singularities. So if that explains your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions? Okay, I mean, you can ask towards the end too. Now let's. Okay, I think we spent a lot of time. Okay, so if you actually, I've recently made a website also, so that a lot of people can use it. So you can always go to this website and look for a list of websites in the website. So I've listed some very useful websites. If you look at the first website, which is called Hyperspace, this always posts some current available jobs in the field of gravity. So this is something to look at. Like you can always also register for email alerts, wherein every week or every month you can get an email which lists all the summer schools, all the summer research projects, or if you're hunting for PhDs or research assistantships, all of them appear here. Like a lot of professors post them here. So you should definitely look at. And once you go to this LIGO India website, it actually talks about graduate schools abroad, which are in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So it lists out all the universities that are currently working on gravity and gravitational wave related. So you might not actually go somewhere. I mean, you might not go into every university and see if this person is doing some research on gravitational waves or not, or gravity or not. If you just follow this list, it's done. Like even they even describe whether it's data analysis or analytical relativity or astrophysics related or numerical relativity or experimental. So you can always see this. So this is a very useful website. Do go to this. And they also posted some really useful resources too to read upon to start with gravitational wave research. That is one thing. And the next thing is Quantum Magazine, as you all know. So you should definitely subscribe to these email alerts too, because if there is something really new and exciting happening in the field of physics, it can be anything. The physicists always give some interview or some people interview them, and there are some many science writers who write a lot of articles. So they also cite some research papers that are related to those articles. So you can always go through the article first, and if you find it really interesting, go through the papers, and if you find it more interesting, you can always start exploring that field. And the next thing is archive, and I think a lot of people know, but this is like a newspaper for physics, wherein every day, I think you should make this a habit. Every day, as soon as you wake up in the morning, if you have a habit of reading a paper, you should also make a habit of this. Like you open this link and you go to your interested links. Like you can, supposing my main interest is GRQC, which deals with general relativity and quantum cosmology. I click on this and I click new. And when I click new, so they show all the research papers that have been uploaded to archive today. So by this, you can keep yourself updated to what's happening in the field, or if there is some paper which can help your current existing project that you're working with a project with a professor. So this is something like a newspaper, and you should develop a habit of looking at this website every day. Every day, it's a must. Only then can you actually expand your knowledge and keep yourself updated and useful, or else no. So that is something really too important to remember. And after that, yeah, Ice Cube. Uh, so one thing, like when you take these big experiments, it's not just done by one university, it's rather done by multitude of universities. Like supposing you take Ice Cube, there are a lot of collaborators of Ice Cube, but the main institute is UW Madison, but there are a lot of collaborators too. And some of these institutes are not so famous in the sense not a people know of them, but still they do have some really good professors and really good projects. So it's easy to get in them. So you should not always target high schools. I mean, high QoS ranking. I mean, remove the thought process that QoS ranking correlates with the quality of research being done. No, that's not true at all. Nowadays, it's not completely true, because QoS ranking is based on the entire university, not just on one field in particular. So it might just be that the university that you're doing in, the physics, it can be anything. That might be the best program in the world, but still the QoS ranking of that university can be 200 or 300 or something. So remember that. So remove the rank, thinking of QoS ranking. The QoS ranking should only come into your mind only when it is some 800, 900, or it doesn't have a QoS ranking at all. Then you should really be concerned about, because that will translate in terms of the research facilities that are there or the quality of students that you get. But if the QoS ranking is some below 500 or 600 or even 700, 800, you should not think about it. You should remove the QoS ranking, and now you should only think about the research group process and everything. So in terms of that, if you see, there are a lot of universities which actually does particle astrophysics, and you can always explore these pages and the process there, and you can always apply to them. So remember, yeah. And I'm going to put all these links on my website. I'm trying to update it as much as possible. So don't think that you'll miss out on all these links. So I'll compile everything and put it on my website so you can look later. And apart from that, one more new thing that I found is Twitter. So please like use Twitter in the sense not to follow the famous news that's happening in the world or to tweet about your hero, famous hero, or heroine, but to actually follow physics. Like a lot of physics professors have Twitter accounts, and a lot of them post about their openings, about their openings in the lab on Twitter. And if you actually follow that professor, you'll get more and more suggestions. You know how this Facebook Messenger and everything works, right? Like once you follow a particular person, the Twitter or the algorithm will suggest more and more professors uh, who are friends of this professor whom you're following. So you can follow more and more professors, and sometimes professors even retweet some other professor's advertisement, or through Twitter you can come to know what each and every professor is doing. You can go to their websites, you can learn new things from those websites. So yeah, compared to Facebook, Instagram, or anything, a lot of people are currently using Twitter. So it's a good habit. I mean, it's high time that you make a Twitter account. And if you don't want yourself to get distracted, then only follow physics professors. That's what I do. I don't follow any of these OnePlus or any of these Amazon or Netflix or Amazon Prime or Moody or Trump, etc. I keep politics, everything, every other thing, cinema, politics, everything. I use Twitter only for physics. If I want to learn about cinema and everything, I use some other source. So if you don't want any distractions and you want it to be useful, then open a Twitter account and follow your favorite physics professors to start with. Then you'll keep on getting more and more solutions, and you can follow more and more professors. So do that definitely. It helped me a lot. I mean, I personally found a lot of let's say opportunities in Europe, and I also tell my current uh, friends who are doing physics and who are looking for opportunities, because I have found those opportunities on Twitter. So it's very useful. Yeah. And the next thing is some very good places to do gravity. So in Italy, there is CISA, which a lot of people do not know. It's a very good place. And the next thing is University of Vienna. That's a very good place too. And recently, I think you people have heard from a professor from University of Southampton talk. That's a great university too. So I think you can just look at this list of universities that I've made, which are not, some of which are not present on the LIGO India website, but still present here. And I found them because I've been working in this field and I've talked to a lot of professors and other students. So yeah. And after this, any questions now? Or, so I think I'm going to talk for 20 minutes more maybe, and then I'll take 15 minutes. And so the talk should be for 1.5 hours at max. That's it. So yeah, any more questions? No? Okay, I'll answer that question in the next slide. That's a good question. The first thing. Any other questions? Okay, I'll keep talking. If you have any questions, you can just post them on the chat, and I can look up those chat. Yeah, LinkedIn is not good because not a lot of professors believe in LinkedIn. So I suggest whether use ResearchGate or Twitter. Those are the two main things. So yeah, even create a profile for yourself on ResearchGate. So those are the two things. No, ranking wouldn't matter while doing a PhD. As I was saying, make sure that the QS ranking is below 800 or 700. It should not be some unknown university, but I mean, I would say any university whose QS ranking is below 400, it's a very good university. All those universities will be similar. So the next thing that you have to look for is how good the research group is. You should always try to have a Skype call with the professor and see how the professor is talking to you, how much he is interested, he or she is interested, and you should try to email one of the students of the professors to know better about the research group. And once you realize that the research group is good, next you should go to the department. Is the department good? Then you collaborate with other professors. And once you know that the department is good, that you can collaborate with other professors. And remember, collaborating with other professors is really important. So don't think that if you actually go to university that you should only work with one professor, because at the end of your research assistantship thesis or anything, you should always have at least two letter of recommendations. Because even after doing your PhD, for getting an H1B or any other visa, they ask you for references, the US Embassy. Unlike, the H1B that you get through regular companies is different, and for academia, the H1B is different, and there you need at least two LORs or three LOR from the last place that you have worked at. So if you do a PhD at a certain university and later on you want to go for a postdoc, so they ask you for three LORs. So if you work with only one professor at a particular university, you won't be able to get the other two LORs properly, and you won't be able to get a visa. It's not just in visa, but also in terms of getting a PhD from RA or RA from thesis, etc. So it propagates everywhere. So remember, you should try to always work with one professor mainly, and at the same time collaborate with two, three professors. Uh, Next, I think, yeah. So making a career in particle physics or computational astrophysics, I think uh, the first thing to do is make sure that you're definitely interested in physics. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who used to tell me while I was still on campus that they're really interested in physics, but moving along the time in the second or third year, they used to lose the interest and they used to start exploring something. I understand, like you're trying to know your interest and gauge your interest, but let it not be something like you start with physics, you say you're very interested in physics, but you don't put in any efforts. But after 2 years or 1.5 years, since you didn't put any efforts, you realize that you may not be interested in physics and you leave it. And because of that, you waste a lot of time. So don't do that. So if you're interested in something, do that. Like starting from your first year itself. So first year, what can you do? I would strongly suggest do your courses well. Like all your mathematics 1, 2, 3, very, 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 very important. Very important. Like the complex analysis, linear algebra, ordinary differential equations, all these are very important. So do them very well. Don't don't skip on them. It's something really, really important. If you haven't done properly in your first year summer, at least revise all of them. Don't do anything else. So only when you're sure that you have done all these maths 1, 2, 3 courses well, then I suggest read some books, like to start off with. So that is the time when you have to talk to some senior, like say, uh, I mean, first in your summer, like if you're sure that you have done all your courses well, that you know your courses well, then what you can do is read some popular science books, either on cosmology or astrophysics, or it can be anything, any popular science book. I mean, nowadays a popular science book is coming on everything. Like you name it, particle astrophysics, dark matter, gravitational waves, you name it. A lot of popular books are out there. And once you read those popular books, you will get a broad overview of the field. And once you get the broad overview of the field, supposing one of the topic in that book interests you a lot, then just go to this archive, as I said in the previously website called archive, and type it there. Like you just open this link, and supposing you say I think bouncing cosmology is very interesting. You just go and type bouncing cosmology, and you'll get a list of papers on it. And yeah, see, there are a lot of papers, and out of these papers, you can look at the abstracts. And supposing you find one of the abstracts very interesting, and always try to look for a review paper. Like a review paper is something that collects everything that has happened in that field and presents it in a simple way so that you can get a technical overview. So from the popular book, you'll get a layman overview, and reading the reviews, you'll get a technical overview. And once you get the technical overview, in that review paper, they will always refer to some technical papers which only talk about that particular aspect in a very in-depth technical way, and you can read that paper. So that is the way to proceed. Like in your first year summer, exploring a lot of popular science books or popular science articles. Like if you keep subscribe to these different magazines like Symmetry Magazine, Quantum Magazine, you always keep getting these alerts. You can always go and see. So that's what you should do. You should explore as much as you can in your first year summer. And once you have explored enough, in your second year, that is when you actually start doing some physics and doing some proper physics courses. And even during your second year, you should really concentrate on the physics courses, like your electromagnetic theory 1, quantum mechanics 1, classical mechanics, and even special theory of relativity. So try to take some electives like special theory of relativity or nonlinear dynamics, etc. Like remember, you can always do your humanities later, even in your fourth year. That is not a problem. So don't think that you have to complete your humanities in your second year. This is true both for geolites and people who are planning on taking a minor in physics. So you can always take humanities later because that's not a big thing. I mean, I don't know if you're personally interested in doing some really good humanity very well, then take it in second year. Or else if you just find it any humanity and you don't care, then you just take some simple humanity whenever you're what you call PR number, what that number, some number I forgot. Yeah, whenever that number is low, just take one humanity. And but during a second year, do take other physics electives. It can be special theory of relativity, theoretical neuroscience, nonlinear dynamics, quantum information, etc. So there are a lot of electives which does not require any crazy physics. So take them and do them. Like at least two to three physics electives and one to two humanities in your second year. And once you did this, starting in your 2-2 or 3-1, it can be any, that is when you start taking projects, because since you have been exploring, since you started to explore exploration, and you have been talking to your seniors starting in your first year summer itself, you can actually you now you have now you know your interests, and since you know your interests, now you can start talking to the professors themselves. And during this entire 2 years, 1-1, 1-2, 2-1, 2-2, before 3-1, try to get a good rapport with the professors. Like talk to them regularly, ask them doubts, discuss any new articles or new stuff that you have read by exploring these popular science books or quantum magazine articles, etc., etc. So talk about this to your professors. Like the professors are always interested, and once you talk to them, get a good rapport, you can get a good project under the professor in your 3-1 or 2-2. And once you get that project, the next thing to do is one thing really important to do during your projects is, I'll tell you that. So this is how my Google Drive looks. Supposing you go for GR resources, I classify them into my bits, IGC, which is my Penn State. And if you go into the IGC Penn State, I organize my folders in this way. Supposing I see some new paper which excites me a lot, which I think I can work on in the future, I create a folder called possible projects. And whichever paper or article or anything that I get, I create a folder named with that, and I store all those papers in that folder. So whenever I want to know what projects I want to work on in the future, I can always come back to this, open a folder, read that paper, and know do I want to work on it. And see, if you go to any professor, they always say the first thing that you should develop is literature review. Like supposing the professor wants you to work on a problem, you want to know how do I start with problem. So the way you start with a research project is how you start literature review. Like you try to collect all the papers that are related to that project. But if you start doing this starting from your first year itself, then you will have a lot of resources on your fingertips. Like a lot of people ask me on physics school, like Bhaiya, how do you share papers as soon as we ask? Because I keep reading, I keep expanding my knowledge, and I always store them on my Google Drive. So if somebody asks, or if even if I want to refer, I can always come back. So this is something always good to do. Not only possible projects, it can be N-body. So recently I've been talking to Nikhil. Since he is doing some N-body simulations, I asked them to send me some links, and I've explored those links. They have some papers. So I put everything under this folder. Or it can be numerical methods, bouncing cosmology, or the projects that I'm doing currently, Common Horizon Dynamics. So there are different things, or multi-messenger astrophysics and astronomy. So yeah, and also for every project that you do, make a Google folder and put all the papers in that folder, and always try to write a summary of whatever you did in that research. It can be a technical report or a brief summary, but it is very important because moving along, you may forget what you have did in the past, but it happens so that when you apply to a professor, the professor might want to interview, and you want to revise all the projects that you have did, and the only way you can revise is if you have a technical report or a summary. So do make sure that you write summaries. So these are some practices that needs to be done for good research. One is making Google Drive folders and organizing them. It's a pain thing to do, but once you get used to it, it's easy. And the next thing is making summaries and writing technical reports. So that is one thing. And the third thing is whenever you get a chance, try to explain this to a professor or a student or give a seminar, because that's the best way to learn when you explain it to someone else. So do all this. And yeah. So that is how you start in your first year, second year. And once you move on to your third year, this is how you do your projects, etc. And make sure you do your projects sincerely. If you slack off in your projects, they're not going to give you a letter of recommendation. Your time is going to get waste, and you won't progress forward. So remember, if you don't have any time, then don't take a project. Focus only on courses. Only if you have time, only then take a project. And if you have taken up a project, do it sincerely and seriously. Okay, yeah. And next thing, so when you're actually reading these papers on your different projects, you might find some author, some professor who actually wrote a lot of papers on your research. So supposing you have some a really good doubt, even which professor was not able to answer, you can always email the professor who wrote that paper and talk to him. Sir, I have started working on this project, and I have this doubt. I've been discussing with my professor, but he was not able to give me a proper answer. This is the question that I have regarding your paper, and this is the thing that I've understood, and this is the explanation that I think it's correct. What do you think? So if you actually write this mail to any professor, he would be so happy and impressed that if you do this every regularly, he might actually invite you to his institute to do a summer project or a thesis. So this is one way to build networks. So remember that. And among all of these things, one most important thing is self-study. Nobody is going to come and ask you to study. You have to study on your own. So you have to get the motivation, determination on your own. So supposing you lose some determination or motivation, how to get it back? By joining clubs like Celestia, or by going to seminars which are being conducted by physics, because that is where you will regain your lost interest or lost motivation. Like one person cannot just continuously study. At some point of the time during the semester, he will lose the passion or the motivation of hard work. That is when you should take a break, like take a 1 week or 3 days break, and don't do anything related to the project. Just participate in other activities, like talk to your friends about physics or anything, or talk to professors or attend these seminars. I mean, you should keep attending these seminars every time possible, but mainly during these breaks, at least you should try to explore some other things to mainly just forget about these things. So this way you will keep yourself motivated. And one thing that every professor sees in a student and wants in a student is independent research. They don't want you to depend on them. This is not spoon feeding. So you should not become people. You should not become people who actually need their professor to do everything. I mean, you need a professor in a way that supposing you do 95% of the work and you can't do the remaining 5%, then you can outsource that 5% to your professor, or you can take the help of your professor and do, or you face some roadblocks like you put in your sincere effort, but still you're not able to complete your project or that particular topic or particular problem, and that's when you discuss with your professor. But the initiation, the work, and everything you should do. So self study is very important. Try to develop that habit as much as possible, and BITS is especially very good in that because there is no attendance. It's all dependent on you whether you study or not, either for research or for your exams. So make sure that you increase your self study. That is important. And as I was telling, user projects are very important. So don't think that it's just an on-campus project that it won't help you much. No, it will be really helpful, because when you're applying for a thesis or a summer project, the only thing you have apart from your academics to show your professor to whom you're applying are these undergrad projects, and the understanding, knowledge, and the overview that the maturity that you got from these undergrad projects. So doing them is really important. And next comes your thesis. Even thesis is really important. Like I've seen people who have been to thesis and didn't do their thesis properly, and at the end of the day, they didn't get a good letter of recommendation, and they were not able to get a good PhD or anything else. So even doing sincere and hard work in your thesis is also important. And irrespective of your interest in physics, be it condensed matter, solid state physics, quantum information, gravitational physics, anything, UCD, anything, develop computational skills, develop them, very important. So you should know Linux very well. And currently, I suggest the best thing to do, supposing you have a Windows laptop, remove Windows, like go to your CS friend or someone, remove Windows from your laptop and put Linux on your laptop and start using Linux. A familiarity with Linux is highly, like what's say, valued outside. And once you know how to deal with Linux, you have to learn at least one programming language. I don't mean Python. Python you can learn on your own, and along the way, you have to learn either C, C++, either of those two. Really important, or Java. But I don't see a lot of Java application, so it's either C, C++, or Python. And Python is something really easy to learn on the way compared to C and C++. So I would strongly suggest learn C++. And I can share a book. It's called forgot the name of the book. I forgot the name of the book, sorry. But yeah, I'll share that later. Like I'll put them in the slides and share the slides to Nikhil so you can look at them. So that book is really good. So learn C++ from that book, or learn Python to a very advanced level if you can. So Python is mainly used for visualization, and C++ is mainly used for programming and for implementing these numerical schemes, etc. So now computational physics has entered every field. Even if you take cosmology, even if you take quantum chromodynamics, quantum field theory, everywhere. If you have this skill, it will be a huge advantage. So I strongly suggest remove Windows and install Linux. Or if you already have a Mac, that's a great option because even that's based on Unix. So a Mac or a laptop with Linux. So stop getting used to the Windows environment, because later on you have to start dealing with high performance computing clusters or supercomputers, or a lot of stuff needs to be done on terminals on Linux based thing. So that is why you should try to get as much exposure to it as possible. Like you should get yourself ease with it. So that's one thing. And while making a good CV, you should remember that it should be easy to read. It should be clean and simple. Do not try to make it fancy. And please always use LaTeX, nothing else. Please don't use documents or Google Docs or Microsoft Word or anything. Please use LaTeX, because using LaTeX will get a clean and simple CV, and it should be easy to read. And one thing is, please, like write good descriptions of your projects. Like if you can't even explain the undergrad projects that you have done properly, then the professor won't believe that you have done good research, or that you have the capability of doing good research, to explain your projects properly. Even if it takes 3-4 pages, no problem. So your CV can be as long as it can. It need not be 2 pages. If they want it to be in 2 pages or 1 pages, they'll mention it on the websites. But most of the programs and everything, they don't have a limit on the number of pages, only on the limit on the size of the file. So it can be as many pages as it can. Only if they mention it being 1 page or 2 pages, then you can remove some things that you may think are unnecessary. And next thing is always mention the school, summer schools or workshops that you have did in the CV, and only the necessary courses. Don't mention your workshop practice, or don't mention your chemistry and all that. Only the relevant courses in physics and mathematics to your research and to the professor that you're applying to. And always try to put some hyperlinks and a list of current advisors and maybe your own quote. So supposing you go to my CV, uh, I think it worked. A lot of professors have liked my CV. I think you people can see it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So previously I was actually putting a photo of mine, but after talking to a few professors, they have actually told that not putting a photo is better. So please don't put any photo. So it should be something like simple, like your name, at what place you're working, your mobile number or your email, and a LinkedIn profile or a ResearchGate profile, and some quote, your own personal quote that you might have, and your education, internships in schools, and projects. You see, I described so much about my project. I didn't go back on it. I didn't adjust myself. Like I wrote as much as I can on all the projects. And beside each project, I've also written which professors. And if they click on this professor, it goes to their profile. So that's what a hyperlink is. So try to put these hyperlinks wherever possible. So this makes the professor's job easy. Supposing they want to know who is this prof that you worked with. Is that prof actually good? Can I consider that prof's LOR to be good? All that. So he wants to know that. So he doesn't want to go and Google this name. Rather, he just wants to click here. So you're making the professor's job easy. So that's something. And make a timeline. And after this, say the relevant coursework, workshop and conferences, and any technical skills that you have, whether you're a beginner or an expert in it, or any software tools, operating systems, any teaching assistants, awards and achievements, and the list of current advisors. Because at many a times they don't even ask who are your advisors. They actually go behind your back and talk to these profs indirectly. They'll not even tell you that they're going to contact the professors. So they just contact indirectly without your knowledge and ask, your student has actually applied to me. Is your student good? Please give me your honest opinion. So that is why it's always good to have a list of current advisors and past advisors on here. So yeah, that's how uh, a decent CV looks like. So it should be clean and all that. So, and apart from that, so if you, while writing an email to a professor, it should be something like, please don't write respected sir, respected professor, dear madam, nothing. Just write professor is name. That's it. That's enough. Like a lot of professors actually criticize who actually write respected or dear or something like that. Just simply write professor this. That's it. And once you come to know the professor well, then you need not even put the professor. You can just say, supposing I talk to my professor David, I just call him David. I don't call him Professor David or Sir. Yeah, but in your first email, just write professor in the name. And here you introduce yourself. It should be short and clear. It should not be long. And after that, you explain what are the main topics of interest for you. And if there are any other side topics that you can work on apart from these main topics, and how do you think that you develop these interests, that you can say by explaining your current and past projects. Like supposing you did one project on quantum information and one project on gravitational waves, then you only write about the gravitational wave project here. you say, since you need not write, since you have done gravitational project and that is why I came into interest of this. No, the professor can understand. You just write your interest and whatever you did related to that field. That's it. And once you explain that, anything, you can always write what experiences or expertise that you have. Like you might have learned a new software or a C++ language, or you might have written your own software or code. You can mention all of those here. And after you mention them, then you talk about that you want to do a summer internship or a PhD or a research assistantship, and this is the duration that I want, and I want to be a part of your research group, and I want to mainly work with so and so postdoctoral students or PhD students, or not only working with you, but I also want to collaborate with another professor from your department or one of your collaborators. So this last paragraph shows that you have actually seriously went to the professor's website and looked at his current students, looked at his papers, and looked at his collaborators, and you actually realized everything. So that's something really important. So that means that you're showing a lot of interest in the professor. So this is how your first email should like. So the content might be different, but this is the template. So once you have done that, you can attach your CV or a Google Drive link. It can be anything, so it doesn't matter. And you write your name. That's it. And once the professor replies, based on that, ask for funding. Like he himself or she herself might talk about some funding. She might say, "Yeah, it's you have a very good profile. I'm willing to take you. Please apply to this program, or please ask your professors to send me letter of recommendation, and then let's have a Skype call." Or she herself will say, like, this is your funding situation. I can't fund you, or I can partially fund you, something like that. And if she gives you a pause to reply, tell her or him that thank you for your reply, and let's have a Skype call sometime soon. And having a Skype call and a face-to-face interaction is really important, because only then can you actually bond with the professor properly, and that initial bonding is really important. So always try to get a Skype call, but don't annoy them. Don't say I want a Skype call, I want a Skype call. I just mentioned that Skype call once, and if they say something about that, okay. If they don't, then after 2 or 3 minutes, again just remind them that maybe a Skype call whenever you're free and if you're available, something like that. So that's how it goes. And next would be, yeah. So I think I've covered these two. Explore different areas in physics, know or interest by 3 to at least through undergrad projects and self-study, and keep a list of professors and associate professors, places, video lectures at one place on your Google Drive, and try to write a summary as well. And always search for Bitsians who are working in the university or lab, and keep talking to your seniors. And do not talk about your funding in your first mail at all. And do not send a generic mail, and email only if you want to go there. It should not be like you're just emailing just for the heck of it. No, only if you want to go there, put your honest effort, make a good email and send. Only then. Always, otherwise a lot of people come to me and say I've applied, but nobody replied me back. I mean, they apply to some 50 places and nobody replies back, because their mails are very generic. They're not tailored towards the professor's interest or research interest. So keep those points in mind. And yeah, a lot of people, I think this will take 5 minutes maybe. So before that, if someone has some questions, I can answer them. So someone asked, how much does CGPA matter? So to be honest, if you want to go into the Ivy League universities like Caltech, Cornell, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, uh, or John Hopkins, etc., GPA do matter in a sense. They have this minimum cutoff. So, see, there are two ways of going. Either performing very well in your academics and doing just fine in your research, or actually doing very well in your research and publishing a lot of papers in your research. If you do that, it doesn't matter what your GRE score, what your TOEFL score is, what your CGPA is. Even if you get a 6 CGPA or a 6.3 CGPA, it still doesn't matter. But to compensate that, you should have published at least 2 3 papers in your field. or the research projects that you have done on. If you haven't published any papers, or if you don't have a stellar letter of recommendations, then having a very good CGPA is important. Since you don't know whether you're going to have a great research environment ahead or a great research projects ahead, or whether you'll be able to publish papers, it might just be that you put in a lot of efforts, but it's such a field which requires 2-3 years to publish a paper. So during those times, not having a good CGPA might affect you. So that's one thing to remember. So try to maintain a good CGPA around 7.58 at least, and anything more than that is always welcome, is always good. But try to maintain that minimum at least. But in case, I mean, I'm not suggesting you all to get a low CGPA and push your subjects aside. I mean, if you look at my CGPA, my overall CGPA is 6.5. But if you only look at my physics CGPA, I've done some 12 physics courses and I have a physics CGPA of 8.5. So that is a very good CGPA for physics. And luckily, most of the PhD programs that I've applied to have only asked for my physics courses and the marks that I scored in them. So, and many other universities did not even ask for them. So they were going to look for what's a overall CGPA, not just physics CGPA. So try to score well in your physics courses. I mean, I don't get it. If you're interested in physics, you should get good marks in physics. That's how it works. I mean, at least to me, that's what it makes sense. Unless you have some phobia or some psychological problems, if you're a normal human being who is really interested in physics and who puts in a lot of time learning physics, then you should be able to score a lot of good marks in your physics courses. So remember that. That's the CGPA thing. So, yeah. Yeah, so if you actually apply to a few places like Penn State or Cornell or Caltech, they actually ask you to submit a separate document wherein you have to fill in all the physics and mathematics courses that you have done and the respective CGPA and the textbooks and which semester you did from. So you have to mention all of those. So they have this minimum cutoff on the overall CGPA. If you have to get some 6.5 or 7, and if you have crossed that, then they're going to look at your physics courses. Supposing if you're from a background that is different from physics like me, then they're going to look at your physics courses. And once they've looked at your physics courses, they'll look at your letter of recommendations. And I'm telling you people, letter of recommendations play a huge role. Yeah, so don't forget about letter of recommendations. So they are very important. Try to always maintain a very good rapport with your professors and try to impress them as much as possible. It's very important. Yeah, so if you do your hard work and if you show your interest in physics, the professor will always be interested. I mean, it shouldn't be like you should go after impressing professor. No, you should go after doing your physics projects well. Then automatically your professor will be impressed. That's how you should think. Yeah. So you should mention your CGPA in your CV at least till you start your PhD. After you start your PhD, CGPAs don't matter anymore. But before PhD, you should mention. Yeah, most of the times the major CGPAs matter compared to the overall CGPA. But as I'm telling you, the overall CGPA also should be something good, around 7, 7.5, because they have some minimum criteria. Like what I'm trying to say is that they'll treat a, supposing you have a 7 CGPA or 6.5 CGPA and you have some stellar recommendation letters and you have done some really good research projects at some really good places and you have some published papers, then your profile will be highly valued for a PhD compared to a person who has a 9 CGPA and who hasn't done much in research. But if he or she also has done good research, then obviously his profile will be what's a paid more. I mean, preferred more compared to yours. So yeah, that's it. I think you got your point. If not, you can ask me more. So
There are more questions at the end.
So if you haven't, if you're currently doing the ME Mechanical Engineering in BITS, and if you want to switch to PhD in physics or explore that, the first thing I would strongly suggest is talk to professors on campus in BITS and I think by now you may know what your interests in are in physics. It can be gravity, condensed matter, or solid state physics, or something, astrophysics or something. Try to approach that professor and talk to them, and maybe do some projects. And during your summer internships, I think ME happens for 2 years, right? During your first summer, try to spend more and more time on your physics. Like, since your summer will be empty, rather than going for a job in a company, uh, try to learn whatever you're interested in, like do some self-study. And starting in your second year, as I was telling, once you do the self-study, you'll come to know which professor is good, who is the most famous professor in your field, and all that, and write to those professors. I'm doing currently ME mechanical engineering at BITS, but during my summer I've studied all these uh, what's it, papers, review articles, etc. And I've done these projects with my undergrad professors here. And now I want to do a project with you. If you think that you can't fund me, we can always start a something like currently a lot of people are doing, work from home, wherein you won't go to that institute directly, but you can work from distance. That you can ask the professor to teach you some problems to test your knowledge, so that you can solve those problems and send the solutions back. So through this, the professor will actually realize that you're actually serious about what you're saying, that you're actually serious in physics. And once you have proved this fact to your professor in your 2-1, then during the winter after 2-1 and summer after 2-2, you can actually go to the place physically and do more research. And once you have done more research, I think you can next apply for a PhD or take a 1 year break. It might hurt, but in a long run, it will not hurt. Like taking a 1 year break. Take a 1 year break and only focus on physics. And since you already have an ME degree, you have a backup. Supposing that 1 year doesn't work out, you can always backdrop that ME, and you can continue being in industry. And during that 1 year, and why I actually tell a lot of people to get computational skills, because supposing you don't do well in research, or you realize that you're not cut out for doing research in physics during that 1 year break, but since you would have developed some computational skills by then, you can always tell the companies during the interviews that I've learned C++ or that I've learned data analysis, so I can be helpful. Because a lot of industries out there like Google, Instagram, Twitter, etc., they need a lot of people who does data analysis or programming. So these expertise that you develop during this 1 year might also be helpful in that way. So don't think that you're wasting 1 year. So that's my suggestion, if that answered you. Yeah, and it's going to be challenging because I mean, you have to do a lot of background study. So yeah, it's going to be hard, but you need to put in a lot of hard work. So yeah, any other questions? Okay, so I think I'll talk for 5 more minutes maybe. The next thing is career in physics. A lot of people think that it's not financially viable if you go and make a career in physics. No, that's not true. In Europe and in US, if you actually get a PhD in any university, your average salary per month is $2,000, and the living cost in such places is around $1,000. So you can save at least $1,000 per month, and that is around 75,000, 80,000. And if it's some European country, it's some 90,000 and 1 lakh. So you can send back home at least 50,000 to 1 lakh. So that's a lot of amount. So it boils down to your lifestyle. You can always have a decent lifestyle in half of your stipend amount, and use the remaining stipend for your family, or on savings, or paying off your undergraduate debts. So don't think that's not a financially viable option. But yeah, you will not be able to live a luxurious life. That I cannot promise. That's one thing. And the next thing is, uh, please give your GREs and TOEFLs by the end of 3-2 or start of 4-1. Please don't keep them towards 4-2 or during your RA. That's the time where you should completely focus your time and energy only on your research and nothing else. So please give them by 3 to 7. And if you think your profile is not good enough, you cannot know whether your profile is not good enough or not. Please, if you want to know whether your profile is good enough or not, please send your CV to your senior and talk to the senior in person over a phone call or a Skype call or something, discuss, and then if that senior or professor, your personal professor says that your profile is not good enough, only then take a 1 year break. And taking a 1 year break is really useful. I took it and I got into very good physics programs. So that 1 year helped me a lot. So that's it. And during this 1 year, you may not make a lot of money, but it's going to boost your entire career in physics. That's there. And keep yourself updated. And always try to get a broad overview on your field. If it's astrophysics, you should know what is star formation, what's happening in galaxies, what's happening in black holes, what's happening in neutron stars, what's happening in n-body. You should try to keep a broad overview. Only then there'll be some influx of ideas and everything. So that's there. And after doing a PhD, you can go into academia or you can join these research centers that are coming up. So there are a lot of research centers in Europe, Canada, or US and Australia, wherein you can join those centers. They are just like industries, analogous to industries, but there you do only research. It's something like your Institute for Advanced Study or Flatiron Institute, wherein there are some research centers where you can do only research and you'll get paid for it. So there are such research centers too. And the next is labs, which are organized by governments. It can be NASA, it can be ISRO, it can be NSF. So there are a lot of labs in US and everywhere where they need people and there's a lot of funding. So that's one career path. And the next is industries. Supposing you have learned a lot of computational skills, data analysis, programming. I've seen a lot of people from UW Madison who have later decided that they no longer want to continue in physics and they wanted to shift into industries. And now they're happy with their current jobs. Like people have joined in Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, etc., and they're earning a lot of money too and having a good lifestyle too. So that's a possibility too. Yeah, I think I'll stop there, and if you have any more questions, I'll answer for a few more minutes. Like maybe we'll stop at 5:45. Yeah. Any more presentation? I think it would depend upon your interest. Maybe Nikhil can float around another message, and if you all want, I can always present on the research that I've done at Penn State on numerical relativity and computational astrophysics, wherein I dealt with binary neutron stars and binary black holes. So, or gravitational waves, I can talk more about them in more bit technical and layman way. So that's one possible way, but I can't give a talk in coming week. So it can be sometime in April end or May 1st. So yeah, I mean, I can, like, you can tell Nikhil or I can tell Nikhil towards the end of the April or May 1st week if you people are still interested. Like, yeah, any more questions? Do you think not going for a... So yeah, dual versus minor. So see, not having a dual is problematic in the sense I was not able to apply to a lot of European universities because they needed me to have a master's in physics. So I couldn't get into Max Planck, I couldn't get into University of Potsdam, I couldn't get into Cardiff University, and I couldn't get into University of Amsterdam. These four universities are really good in Germany, in Europe, but I couldn't get into these. Or University of Trento. There are a lot of these very good universities which does computational astrophysics, but all of them required masters in physics. And the professors were so interested that they actually fought with the committee, graduate committee in those universities to actually allow me to give an exam and an interview. But even then, they didn't allow me. So that is a huge drawback of not having a master's, that you won't be able to apply to a lot of places in Canada and also in what's it, Europe. So personally, I was not able to get a PhD in perimeter because I didn't have a master's. So I was really sad because the professor was so interested, and we really spent 2 months fighting with the admissions and with the funding organizations to convert one of the PhD funding into MSc funding so that I can join Perimeter for a master's and later on convert into a PhD. But none of that happened just because I didn't have a master's in physics. So that is there. Remember that. But if you're fine with only applying to few universities in Europe and few universities in Canada or all universities in US where for PhD, then fine. Having a minor will be flexible in the sense you need not do those courses which you don't want to do, like solid state physics, condensed matter, or something like that. You can only do those courses which you're highly interested in, so that you'll have a more focused thing. But one more drawback of doing a minor is you may not be able to do all the courses as they would clash with your regular courses. So the first suggestion would be, supposing you're on a financial trouble that you're, what's a, if you go to 5 years that you have to spend extra loan money, if that's a big problem, then go for a minor. If that's not a problem, then your first preference should be uh, MSc Physics dual degree, or else it's fine if you do a minor in physics. You can always go for a few universities in Europe and US. US accepts with a bachelor's. So in US there is no problem, but there are problems in Europe and Canada. So keep that in mind. Yeah, yeah, it does count as a master's at MSc. uh, I did a minor in physics. So if you have done a BE plus MSc, they don't really care about your other degree until unless that the other degree is going to help physics. Supposing you do MSc Physics plus BE Computer Science, then since you did computer science, it will help you get a lot more programming. Like you'll be easy working with this coding, developing softwares, etc. So that will be a huge plus point. Or supposing you go into experimental and you have some electrical engineering or electrical sciences background, then since you already know your way around dealing with some different instruments, that will be a huge plus point. So if you think that it's going to add to your profile, yeah. But if you're going towards pure theory, then it really doesn't matter what background you have. Like they're just only going to look at your MNC physics and your projects. Single degree physics, I think the options will be limited compared to a BE plus MSc because, as I was saying, a person with a computer science background will always be favored compared to a person with just only MSc physics. So if you just only do MSc physics, then you have to make sure that you do some really good projects, that you get some really good letter of recommendations, so that supposing you want to go into computational astrophysics, though you didn't do a computational science degree, you have to make sure that you have learned some enough coding, and you can only prove them by maybe showing your GitHub profile, or by developing your own software or a small codes to visualize different things, or to implementing different numerical schemes. And you can always maintain this as on a GitHub, and you can always show these GitHubs and tell him, sir, I've written these visualization scripts and I've implemented these numerical schemes. So I've done this in C++, so I know C++ or I know Python. That's the only way to prove. I didn't personally face any problems except for the HOD of mechanical who kept on asking me as to why I'm taking this route, but I simply told them that I'm only interested in physics. And what I did was I put my thesis title in such a way that I think I titled it as uh, Plasma Physics and Thermodynamics. No, I think maybe something related to fluid dynamics and magnetohydrodynamics. But since that is something that comes under your heat and fluid mechanics club course, he agreed. So that's one smart way to go with it. In terms of, I didn't get your question by what you mean issues you face with admission criteria. I mean, having a minor in physics, I told you, as I was telling you, in Europe and Canada, I did face a lot of problems. I was right away rejected because I didn't have a master's, or in some cases, they tried hiring me as a PhD, but still they were not able to do after 2 months of efforts because I didn't have a master's. Uh, so yeah, but in US I didn't face any problems just having a minor. Okay, so firstly, I think it's best if you do a thesis in your own field of interest that in which you want to do your PhD. Only if you're not sure what your field of interest is, then doing your two theses in two different fields makes sense. Or else, please try to do a thesis in the field that you want to do your PhD on, because when you apply to universities, they're always going to look at whether this person has a previous research experience in that field or not. That will always be favored. But supposing you have a very good academic profile and you have published some papers in that field, which is not related to the field that you applied for a PhD, then they may take you. What I'm telling you, it's a fact. A lot of people might say, but it's very rare that they take people who have experience in some other field and they want to switch to another field. Like you can always switch to another field during PhD, but not while getting admitted into PhD. So highly suggest try to get a something that's at least related to your field of interest. Yeah, it will be considered masters, even your 4 years MSc. But at some places, they require master courses to be 5 years. So for those universities who cannot apply, but at other universities, they find it even if the masters is 4 years. So if you just go to that website, they'll explain that. Yeah, that is one drawback of doing a single degree, because some places require 5 years of degree, not 4 years of degree. But yeah, I did it in physics and I went for a PhD in physics. So that is what I yeah. Yeah, dual helps. I mean, that's why I suggest like in your first year itself, try to get a good dual, the dual that you're interested in, computer science, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. So yeah, it will help since it's 5 years. So I think if anyone else has some questions, they can stay online and keep putting messages. And if anyone wants to leave, they can leave. I think I'll stay for a few more minutes now and take any more questions, or else, yeah. So yeah, again, going for an early grad, as I was telling, there are these criteria for some universities wherein you have to do uh, compulsory 5 years of degree. If it's lesser than 5 years of degree, you'll not be eligible. So keep in that mind. But those universities are very rare, very very rare. So that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, going for a complete 1 year of thesis will be really helpful compared to doing 1 year, 6 months of thesis and 6 months of PS. Okay, any more questions? Thank you everyone for attending. I think 30, 35 people is a really good number. Happy to see so many people interested. Okay, I think there are no more questions, or should I wait for a few more minutes? Okay, if I don't receive any other question in a minute or so, I think we can stop the meeting.
Yeah, I think this is it. I'll stop the recording.
Okay.